All right, let's briefly take a look at where we left off. Come on, baby. All right, there we go. So now we can turn left and right, which is really great. It'd be nice if we could jump. So what I'm going to do too is in my tile palette here is I'm going to go down and select my brush. And then I'm going to just create just a little, let's make sure that we are on our platform tile map layer and not our background. And that way it'll add the collision to it. And I'm just going to add a little, let me undo that last one. Or I don't even have to undo it. I'll just put this other box there. Now you can see we've got a little box when our player falls to jump on. Now we could just adjust the jump height. Now I purposely went with something that was a little bit darker off from this other one, just so that it stands out when the player, against the white, when the player is moving. All right, so if we go in here and we look at our input system, remember we created this player input platformer early on? And in the very first lesson, we created this jump, and it has and what we did is we mapped the keyboard, the spaceboard for keyboard here. And if we select jump here, let's go over to the side here, and we select our player. Let's see, and we expand our player input here. We have a lot of really good stuff down here, right? We have one down here called on jump, and this on jump is mapped to the spaceboard keyboard here. And so these are, again, called, they used to hit right explicitly binding in here. But remember, this on jump method that it creates for us by default is bound to the spaceboard key. So this is a little different if you've done tutorials with me in the past and we were actually writing out all of the commands to make something move by hitting the spacebar and stuff. So that's what's pretty nice about this input system. This is very similar to Unreal's input system, which is nice. So if any of you end up, interviewing for jobs using Unreal, you'll have a little bit of connection that way. But sorry for the quick pause and then jump open to the script. I should have made you aware of that. But yeah, so let's go ahead and take a look at our script here. Now, we have this player controller for our platformer game. Again, we named it that because we might have multiple ones in the same project. What I'm going to do is just highlight this entire onMove method and just hit Control D here. And it's just going to save me some time. So remember, if I select my player up here and we look at our input, player input here, we have an onJump method. And this is the one I want to use. So I'm going to change it from onMove to onJump. And we have this input value, and what this represents is that space bar, right? Because this onJump method is bound to that space key. All right, so I'm going to highlight all of this, just press the delete key, and I'm going to type if, and I'm going to hit tab. Now remember, we use if statements to check logic, right? So the keyword value here that's connected to input value gives us access to the different components, values, like variables, things like that are already built into the input system. So one of those, for example, is if the value is dot pressed. And so what is this saying is pressed? It's saying if whatever that we decided to map is pressed, which was that space key, right? I'm going to leave this open so you guys can see this. I think it's probably a little bit more helpful because there's a lot of hidden things here, so it can get confusing. So please don't be stressed if it's, if you're like, wait, what? So the value here is pressed again, and all the logic that's connecting these two is sort of hidden. But what it's really just saying is, hey, we actually early on we said we wanted to bind this spacebar key, to this jump. So I'm going to hit the space bar, and it says if that value is pressed, that means we hit the space bar. We want to essentially jump, right? Well, what do we want to do? Well, let's take a look at our player has horizontal speed. Let's take a look at our flip sprite, like all of these things. How are we actually moving our player? So if I click on run speed here and I hit F12, you can see it takes me to these different areas in our thing. So there's this walking. So let's click on that. You could see it takes us down to the walking parameter. So let's go back to, let's see. Let's hit this again and let's click on our first option. So this is run speed, right? And then this is down in vector2 move.input. So it takes us down here. So in our walking method here, right? Because we're kind of going to be doing an on jump here, right? We're doing we're looking at our rigid body dot velocity, right? But we have this method down here where it says player velocity And then what is that? It's connected to a new vector 2, and that vector 2 has an x and it has a y, right? So what we can do is we could just map the jump to that same velocity method, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this. I'm going to go ahead and just type in here the name of our rigid body, which is, if you remember, RB2D, rigid body 2D. So I'm going to grab that. And then inside of on jump, I'm going to say rigid body dot velocity, because remember this is, we'll do linear velocity, plus equals. So this is like saying, here, I'll just write it out full notation, equals this rigid body velocity plus, right, a new, put this on a new line, a new vector 2, because this velocity already has a vector 2 in it. And this will take in two parameters, 0 and 0. So what I'm doing here is when I press the key, I'm going to add to the linear velocity, this linear velocity here, 0 to the x. That means I don't want it to move x and x on the x-axis, and then 0 on the y. But I do want it to move on the y. That means I want to add a little bit of force to make my player move upwards. So let's say we add like 5 here or something, and we save that. And we go back into our game here, right? And I go ahead and press play. You're going to notice a problem with this right off the bat. I go ahead and hit spacebar. You can see my character's jumping, but I actually have a little bit more of a function where my character almost turns into like a super dude where he can fly. See that? And that's not what we want. We want it to be when our character is grounded. But also, we never want to hard code these values. So what we can do is we can go up here and we can just create a serialized field. So here's run speed. Well, I'd like to actually, let's make this serialized as well so we can access it outside of our player here. So I'm going to go ahead. Oh, I already had a serialized field. I thought I didn't see that. Sorry. So I record some of these videos at 5 a.m. Before my little ones wake up. So let's go ahead and make this jump. And let's make this 5. I'm going to go ahead and grab jump and copy that. I'm going to go all the way down here and change 1 to jump. And I'm going to save that. Actually, we called our other one run speed, so I'm just going to hit F2 on this and just name this jump speed so that we're keeping our naming variables the same. I'm going to go ahead and hit next here, and I'm going to save this. One other thing I want to point out is that you can actually, if you select your player, which you can do it down here, or you have to go inside of your player here, when we look at our player's rigid body here, you have a gravity scale. So if I set this to 10, just as an example, and I press play, notice that when I press the spacebar, he's barely moving. And compared to if we set that gravity scale to 1. So this is a way of affecting the gravity on the individual object. There's also, if you want the gravity in the entire game to be affected, and so if you go to edit and you go to project settings here, there is a physics 2D section here. And here's our general settings. And you can see this is minus 9.81 on the y-axis. You can adjust this and this will affect all of the gravity in the entire game. So I'm going to go ahead and go back here and let's fix that where our player can be a superhero and keep running. So what we'll use is we're going to be using layers. So you can see here, and Unity is really big on layers, like lighting layers, all this other stuff. And we have a platform grid here, and we have this platform tile map. And if I go into layers here and I go to add layers, it shows us that we have these different types of layers. Down here is render layers. This is for things that you want to be affected by certain lighting, and we'll get into that probably in another class. We have these layers, which are the layers that things are sitting on, water, UI. We've created these in the past. We have sorting layers, which we use to sort in between where our background, like what's in front of what. And then we use tags. I like to use tags as like, I'll tag this as player, and then I use that in my code to identify a certain person. It's almost like giving them a name. Now these layers are great for a couple things, right? One, I can use it for collision. So I can type in here platform. And then I can go to my platformer tile map here and change the layer to platform. And one thing, for example, like my main camera actually uses this for rendering. So you could have multiple cameras in your scene that only see certain things. So you can see here, if we go over to essentially our camera, it has rendering, default renderer, perspective, render type base. It's got all of this different stuff. Well, if we look at, let's see, our culling mask here, it says everything. Well, I can actually say nothing and you won't see anything in our game view. I'm actually going to redock my animator here for now, just so we get to see a little bit more. And if I'm like, oh, you know what? I want my camera, this camera, to only render the platform. Now you can see that the camera is only rendering the platform. Generally, depending on this, if it's just a basic game like this, you want it to render everything. Something else that's important to point out is you can actually select which objects will collide with each layer. So we have this platform tile map that says platformer here, right? Well, I can go to edit here and go down to project settings and go back to that same physics tab. And if we scroll down a little bit, you'd see, layer collision matrix here, the second tab. You could see here that I now have a platformer tab here. And this platformer collides with default, it collides with transparent effects, it collides with everything. So say we wanted the ground to not collide with certain physics objects like rain or whatever, right? Because otherwise it would bounce off the surface. I mean, which would actually be kind of cool. But let's say our game isn't very performant and we want to negligate that. We can make the rain particle have its own layer. And then we could just say, you know what, uncheck that. I don't want the water layer to affect my platform layer or whatever, things like that. So just important for you to understand that. Now, because we're checking if we're colliding with this platform here, we're going to need a variable over here. And the variable is essentially because this is on our character, what is our collider in our scene? Well, we have a rigid body. This gives us physics. And then we have this capsule collider here. So how do we access this? Well, you probably guessed it. Just start typing the word capsule and see what comes up. And you can see we have capsule collider. Now, if you see that there's a 2D here, naturally you're probably thinking, well, this must be the 3D version and we're making a 2D game, so we have to select this 2D version. I'm going to type space here, and I'm actually just going to copy this, paste it, just make this lowercase, and then close that up. So now we have access to this, we have a variable. We don't have access yet to this capsule collider component. Now, pause for a second and think about, well, how do I get this component here? And if your eyes naturally move down to here, you guessed right. We're just going to Control D this, change anim to capsule collider, grab this, and now this capsule collider variable is storing a reference to that capsule collider 2D there. All right, so let's go ahead and move to our onJump method here. And what I'm going to do up here is I'm just going to add another if statement. And what I'm going to say here is if this capsule collider here, right? And a way of saying if this capsule collider is not doing something is we put an exclamation point in the beginning. So if our caps collider is not touching, so is touching here, well, what are we trying to check if it's touching? Well, if we go inside of our platform here, you can see it's called a layer, and we go to add layer here. These are all layer masks, right? So these are render layer masks. This is our layer masks here. This is our sorting layer masks. So what you write here in order to access that is you say layer mask dot get mask, and then I'm just going to copy platform, and I'm going to put this in there. So anything under that platform name, let's actually bring this on another line here. So you could, come on. Sorry, is touching layers. I grabbed the wrong one because these are layers here. So is touching layers, and what we want to grab this platform. So if it's not touching this, then all we're going to do is exit out of this method. And because we have this before, oops, let's type return. There we go. So what it's going to do is when we call this on jump method, it's going to check this one first. And if our player here is not, our capsule collider rather, is not touching this, it's going to return, which means it's just going to jump out of this method. And then it's just going to kind of like restart the script to see what we want to do next. So let's save this and let's test it. So you can see here I'm moving. Oh, what is happening here? Let's press play again. Interesting. Here's our player. Move them up a little bit and in. See why this is causing this. Pause this for a second. We have a 5 on the y-axis here, which is probably this right here. So we have on jump, we have y, which is 5, which it shouldn't be scaling that. It should be just making my character jump the position on the y-axis. How did that happen? I think I know what happened. On this flip sprite here, this should be 1. That was silly. And then this should be jump speed. Okay, I think that's what happened. Okay, let's try this one more time. Let's press play here. Somehow I got those mixed up. Again, sorry, I record these fairly early in the morning. All right, there we go. I'm hitting jump. And notice I'm hitting it. I can't jump in the air. Let's go test our game. And we might have to adjust the jump so that it's a little higher. There we go. So he can get out. But we also don't want him to be able to jump. So let's bring this down to 6 maybe. He gets caught on that edge a little bit. That smoothing isn't working too great. Remember early on we were talking about, we added smoothing to this platformer so that our character wouldn't get caught in between. And that's what this like composite operation, see merge. Anyway, so I like 6. So let's go ahead and select our player here. I'm going to make the jump speed 6. I think that works best so far. Let's hit Control S, save project. And I think that's good. We pretty much got a pretty good jump going.